joining us. Appreciate you guys being here. Before we get started with Abbott, I just want to share a few things. My name's Liz. I'm with the Brewseum. I'll be chatting with Abbott today, and this is our virtual speakeasy. Whenever we've been hosting these events, which is usually twice per week, this space is meant to be that space that we're all missing and we all love, drinking establishments, where we can have good conversations with good people. And that's been the whole sort of background behind all of the things that we do with the Brewseum, not just virtually, but in person. And I'm excited for when that happens, that in-person gatherings happen again. So this is your bar. Chat with each other. We're going to mute you as soon as we get started here, but use that chat room to ask questions, make comments, share jokes, whatever you want to do.
Ask me anything. I'm an open book if you want to, any questions.
Abbott is one of the most accessible people I've ever met. And we're going to get to some fun
Is that a good thing? Maybe.
We're going to get to some fun stuff too. So I'll chat with her for a little while and then get to some questions, maybe interject your questions when I can. Other than that, I think that's it. So thanks again for coming. We're going to meet you guys now and get started. Abbott, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. I'm hanging in there. This lovely background of Eden Park cleverly conceals my closet. My office is, but of course in New York they call it like a legal second bedroom, but it's really a closet.
Legal, so, yeah, good old New York. So yeah, Abbott's in New York City. I'm in Chicago. Share where you are too, because at a lot of these virtual events, we've actually been having a lot of global representation, which is pretty cool to see.
That is pretty cool.
My background, if you're curious, is the Old Town Ale House in Chicago. It's where I drink quite a bit when I'm allowed. It is a
Minneapolis.
It is a little bit of a dive bar, but for me, it's sort of a home away from home. And sometimes it's sort of like my own little speakeasy because a lot of bad things can happen, I guess. All right, so Abbott.
Yeah.
By the way, everybody, I've known Abbott since when Sin in the Second City came out, like 2007?
2007, yep.
I reached out to her. This is when I was doing programming for the Chicago History Museum, and I read her book and loved it like everybody else, and we'll get to that a little bit later. And she came to the History Museum, did some stuff, and ever since then, she can't shake me. So,
and nor do I want to. So.
Yeah, we have some fun times together, which again, we'll get to some other goofy things that we do. But Abbott, you are one of the reasons why I wanted to be friends with you after I read Sin, was because you have this unbelievable way of putting words on paper where it's just so engaging all the time. With all of your books, I'm just like, it's our page turners just because of the way you have this great flow. So what I want to know right off the bat is, how did you get into writing, first of all? And you can feel free to tell people about you, where you're from, and how you really got into being an author.
Oh, sure. I'm originally from Philadelphia. If anybody here recognizes the accent, I've tried to get rid of it, but it has not been successful. I live in New York City now. I was a journalist in Philly for 6 years, and I moved to Atlanta for 6 years, and then started trying to write narrative nonfiction. And I came across Sin in the Second City, the subject matter, kind of in a weird way. My grandmother, my dearly departed grandmother, told me a story about her mother and her mother's sister. They had emigrated from Slovenia in 1905 and moved to the United States. And they settled in Pittsburgh, but one weekend the sister took a trip to Chicago and was never heard from again. So I was always really intrigued and haunted by this bit of family lore. I began looking into Chicago in 1905, figuring, you know, what was going on, where might have my ancestor had ended up, who knows. And instead I came across clippings for Marshall Field Jr., the son of the department store mogul. he reportedly got shot in a brothel called the Everleigh Club, and this brothel was sort of the most lavish brothel in the world. It was run by these two mysterious sisters. They had a $50 entrance fee, which in 1900s was quite a bit of money. They had royalty visiting. They had sports stars, journalists, etc. And I forgot all about my missing ancestor and was much more interested in the story of these two sisters and their fantastic brothel in Chicago. It was in the South Side. It was at 22nd and Dearborn, which, as I understand, no longer exists. So that was my first foray into narrative nonfiction, my first foray into history, and I had a lot of fun with that book, and fell in love with Chicago really in the process.
Which, by the way, every time I mention your name to someone in this town, they kind of go bonkers. They go,
oh, that's very sweet.
They go batshit crazy over that book.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was.
Why do you think that story, that narrative, resonates so much with people?
Well, I think Chicago is very interested in its own history.
Yeah.
Oh, my friend Lionel's. I think that Chicago is very and rightfully interested in its own history. You guys have a fascinating history. I sort of pick up where The Devil in the White City left off, which, obviously was a huge book in Chicago. And I think people just love that period of time. And it's about a red light district and what some people back then called the wickedest city in the world. So how could you, yeah, so I guess, people wanted to read about the wickedness.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was quite the debut from you. And then you have, again, these other fascinating books, American Rose, Lara Temptress, Soldier Spy, and now Ghost of Eden Park. And they all are based in history, right?
They're all nonfiction. So,
right.
So they are history. Yeah.
Things that actually happened. How did you, when you got hooked with the Everleigh Club and the sisters, did you decide that this was the path you wanted to take, or are you just like finding these subjects almost accidentally and going?
It was a little bit of both. Once I got a taste of how fun. My goal in writing history is I'd like to write the history books I wish I had in school. When people say history is boring, they're just not reading history the way it could be told. There's great stuff in history, and if you can structure it like a novel, you find the details. It's just people living sort of fantastic lives that there's nothing boring about them. And I kept digging, and I'm very interested in women's history. Stories that had been pushed to the margins. History was usually written by, for, and about men, and I wanted to resurrect women's stories. If women were mentioned at all, it was sort of as domestic observers. They were watching the man as he conducted his important historical endeavors. Right. And I just wanted the opportunity, and it's a privilege, to try to bring women to the forefront, and bring their points of view to history.
And that's certainly the other thread, right? Not just history, but these powerful women. All of your books really kind of feature these powerful women.
Yeah. There's always going to be a woman in one of my books that's sort of either she's malicious and nefarious, or she's a sort of a force of good. But either way, there'll be a woman who's making some sorts of waves in history. Right.
And there is a very important woman in Ghost of Eden Park.
Yes.
An important player and all that. So let's get into that book. How did you discover the story? How did you discover George Remus?
Well, I'm going to try to pull up my slideshow because I have some fantastic images that I think people would enjoy seeing. So if you bear with me for like 2 seconds and see if I can pull this thing up. Hopefully I'm not. Is that work? Wait. Is this working? Is that working? No. Yeah. So, yeah, so here's how I usually get my ideas, either from my grandmother or from researching in archives, but this was the first time I got the idea from a book from a television show. This is a still from Boardwalk Empire, which ran on HBO for about 5 seasons. And it was really this brilliant show. It perfectly captured the dawn of Prohibition. Bootleggers were still figuring out how to circumvent all of the new laws, and nobody had yet heard of Al Capone. And here, there was a minor character named George Remus. He's pictured here, played by the wonderful actor Glenn Fleshler. And Remus was really innovative and weird, and he spoke of himself in the third person, as you can see here. And just to give you some context for this, Remus is on the phone with Steve Buscemi's character, and they're conducting a business deal. Things are getting a little bit heated. And Remus says, Remus finds you petty and resentful. And Steve Buscemi's character retorts, well, Remus can go fuck himself. I'm quoting from the show. And so I wanted to know if George Remus was a real person in history. And indeed he was. And indeed, the real George Remus also spoke of himself in the third person. He said things like, this is going to be a hell of a Christmas for Remus. And so many people want to kill Remus. And my personal favorite was Remus's brain exploded. And he was much more interesting and dramatic, I think, than anything that was presented on Boardwalk Empire. And doing a little bit of digging, I knew he'd be a really fantastic book.
So it's part of my job is to always, tell people about how great the Brewseum is.
Yes.
And it's a small Brewseum world, everybody, because Remus, who was part of Boardwalk Empire, of course, had an actor named Michael Shannon in it.
Yes. Yes, he did.
Michael and I actually drink in this bar.
Oh, you're kidding me.
No, and he actually is a big supporter of the Brewseum, and he narrates our video in our exhibition at the Field Museum.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know. Was he from Chicago originally?
No, I think he's from Kentucky, but he actually lives by you in New York. And then
that's what I thought. Yeah. Does he just hang out in Chicago a lot?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So great guy, another Brewseum fan.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to Remus. So you find Remus because of Boardwalk Empire, and then what happens?
I start digging, and I do a little bit more digging. I'll talk about researching Remus. I know people usually like to hear about research. So here is, this is a picture of one of the 7 volumes of a trial transcript I found. This was at the Yale University Law Library in New Haven. And it was really rare to find a 1920s trial transcript because usually they're discarded, they're lost, they're destroyed. They never survived this long. And it was a gift. There was a 5,500-page trial transcript. And as soon as I knew it was there, I hightailed it up to Connecticut. I spent a week from opening to closing, Xeroxing every single page of this trial transcript. There were about 7 or 8 volumes, just this thick. And with this beautiful overhead scanner, this scanner was the best thing I've ever seen in my life. Usually I'm used to wrestling books on scanners and cutting things off and giving myself a back pain. But this was great. It took me about 4 months to read every single page of this transcript and take notes. And the resulting outline was about 85,000 words, which was nearly the length of the book itself. And I loved every minute of it. The trial transcript has such fantastic details. One of my favorites was that George Remus did not wear underwear. And this in the 1920s was cause for great alarm. Not wearing underwear was potentially the sign of an unsound mind. And just fantastic stuff in here. The trial transcript is one of the reasons I was able to write the book as a whodunit, sort of a narrative nonfiction murder mystery. And that's really hard to be able to do, but there was just such great detail in here, and it really allowed me to do things cinematically and add a little bit of fun twists and turns in there.
Yeah, anybody who's ever done any sort of research at a library, museum is going to immediately look at that scanner and drool.
Exactly. I called it my my gorgeous sunbed of knowledge. So pretty much that's what it was. Here's a picture of George Remus himself. You can see he kind of does resemble Glenn Fleshler, the actor. And Remus, if you're the Brewseum people are not aware, grew up in Chicago. He was a German immigrant who grew up in Chicago. His family moved here when he was a child. His father was an alcoholic, a mean and abusive alcoholic, according to Remus. And he had to quit school at age 14 and go work in his uncle's pharmacy, I think on the north side. And eventually ended up studying law and becoming a really renowned and successful Chicago defense attorney. He made a name for himself with how he conducted himself in the courtroom. He would leap across the room and cry and tear at his hair and throw tantrums. And he earned a nickname, the Weeping, Crying Remus. And he suddenly, in 1920, started getting a new type of client, men who were charged with violating prohibition laws. And therefore, he changed his career yet again and started becoming a bootlegger. So. And I won't go through all my slides. You can feel free to interject, and
okay.
Yeah.
So just for folks who might not know the big picture story of Ghosts of Eden Park, George Remus is at the center of all this, but can you give us the quick overview?
Sure. So the Ghosts of Eden Park is the true story of George Remus, America's most successful bootlegger. He was the real life inspiration for Jay Gatsby, which was really a fun part of the book. I could get into that. He's flying high until his wife falls in love with the very prohibition agent who put Remus in jail. So it was quite a betrayal. There is a love triangle, a murder, a sensational trial, and a really fascinating woman character, a prosecutor who was in charge of Remus's cases. It's sort of a quintessential 1920s story. I don't think it could have taken place in any other era, but just really stranger than fiction.
I don't know how deep you want to get into the story in case there are people out there who've not read the book.
Oh, just no spoilers. I'll talk about anything else. But I mean, if you want me to, is there anything you wanted to ask in particular? Here's Imogene. This is George's wife. His second wife. They met when she was a dust girl in his Chicago law office. She would clean up after hours. I love this photo of her, just the elaborate hat, the very satisfied look on her face. And if you look closely at her left hand, she's very carefully positioning her ring finger so you can see the enormous diamond that's on her finger. She knew George Remus was going to be successful and wealthy, and sort of attached herself to him. He confided in her about all of his bootlegging plans, and he gave her a nickname. He called her Prime Minister, the Prime Minister. But she only had one nickname for George Remus, and that was Daddy. And before they got married, she confided to a friend that she was going to, quote, roll Remus for his role. So she had some deliberate intentions there, but she was a kind of a fascinating villain in the story.
There's some really weird stuff in this story. Is there anything that you found that was really bizarre that didn't make it in the book?
That didn't make it in the book. I did want to talk more about the Gatsby connection.
Yeah.
I didn't get to put a lot of that in the book, and I'll kind of fast forward to some of this stuff to, before I get to that, actually, people might enjoy this. This is an actual menu from a Chicago speakeasy circa 1925. And I found this in some historical society, and I just loved it. The name of the cocktails, of course, there's the common ones like the Gin Fizz and the Gin Ricky, the Tom Collins, but then you also have the Prince of Wales, the Dirty Dick Special, the Self-Starter, is sort of a couple of these things. My favorite is the Corpse Reviver, which was a hangover cure. As the name might imply, you drank too much dirty dick the night before, you wake up and you have a corpse reviver, and then you're good to go. And I love of course, the prices on these, 75 cents for a champagne cocktail, was pretty good deal. But I'm really glad this survived. Just a really cool speakeasy menu, from an authentic one from back in the day. So, okay. I will take you, so George Remus, here's the Gatsby stuff. Okay, so George Remus and his wife Imogene moved to Cincinnati. It was a strategic location in terms of where pre-prohibition whiskey was kept and stored. And they were really, they both came from poor backgrounds, and they were really interested in establishing themselves as respectable citizens. They wanted to hobnob with the Taft family. The president was in Cincinnati, his family, other sort of prominent and important blue blood families. And to that end, they decided to have a big New Year's Eve bash in December of 1921. Here is an actual invitation that they sent out. Again, this was amazing that this survived. I found it in a historical society in outside of Cincinnati, the Delhi Historical Society. And if you can read the text on here, it says, dive to health, swim to wealth, float on happiness. And considering the level of debauchery that they had planned at this party, I don't quite understand the mom and the baby there. But that's what Imogene designed, and what Imogene wanted, Imogene got. And so here's Imogene Remus the night of the party, getting ready in her boudoir. I love this picture for the detail, the sort of fringed lamp and this bizarre Victorian print on the wall, and Imogene just gazing at herself. It's such an evocative picture, and her dress is just fantastic. So here is a picture, a cartoon, which newspapers never print these anymore, of exactly what happened at this party. And the big highlight of the party was the introduction of the Imogene baths. It was this $125,000 pool that Remus had built in honor of his wife. He called it the Imogene baths. You can see that he had guests were using the diving board as a rostrum. There were synchronized swimmers going up and down, all sorts of debauchery. There's Imogene herself in a scantily clad one piece, a sort of daring one piece, ready to execute a dive. And here is really where the Gatsby stuff comes in. George Remus's party favors for his guests. Here's a picture of one of them. This was an engraved watch that all of the men got. It says, from Mr. and Mrs. George Remus, 1921. Every man got an engraved watch and a diamond stick pin. Every woman got a brand new 1922 car. So, you know, decades before Oprah, sort of, you get a car, you get a car. It was a surprise. Every single woman. Everybody got a $1,000 bill slipped underneath their dinner plate. And mind you, this is in an era when the average annual salary was $1,200. So it's really quite a staggering display of wealth. And, you know, it's these stories that gave rise to the idea that Remus inspired Fitzgerald in his creation of Gatsby. And there were all of these apocryphal stories that Fitzgerald and Remus met when Fitzgerald was stationed in Louisville, Kentucky during his military service. And I don't think they ever met. There's no hard evidence that they ever met, but it's definitely fair to say that Fitzgerald knew who Remus was when he was drafting The Great Gatsby. Everybody knew who George Remus was at that time. And the parallels between Gatsby and Remus are conspicuous. You know, both men were obsessed with a mysterious woman. Both men had these lavish mansions through these really incredible parties. And as Fitzgerald writes, Gatsby sprang from a platonic conception of himself. He sort of invented a persona that he wished to inhabit for a world that he wanted to belong to, and the world never quite accepted him. And I think both Remus and Gatsby had that sense of melancholy about wanting to belong somewhere that wasn't really inviting. And so I think, you know, he definitely did inspire Gatsby in his creation.
Women got cars, diamonds, and $1,000 under their plates.
Yes.
I mean,
and he also lit guest cigars with $100 bills, which, I mean, it's just kind of gross.
That's obscene.
Yeah, it's obscene.
Clearly, I've been going to the wrong parties. Okay, so I was going to ask you about the fact of whether or not those two had met, Fitzgerald and Remus. But if Remus is this much in the news, clearly.
Oh yeah, Fitzgerald definitely knew who he was. And both men owned the string of pharmacies as well. I think that was a crucial detail. You know, Remus got a string of pharmacies to exploit the loophole of you can buy, manufacture, sell, distribute alcohol for medicinal purposes. So utilizing pharmacies was a big part of his plan. And I think Fitzgerald was also inspired by that detail because Gatsby also owned a string of pharmacies.
Sure. Did you want to share any more slides as we continue on?
Oh, we can go through if one strikes your fancy. Oh, well, this is Mabel Walker Willenbrandt. We're talking about women's history, so I can talk a little bit about her.
Yeah.
Now, she was a fascinating character. Also in Boardwalk Empire, her name was Esther Randolph on the show. And when President Warren Harding appointed her to be the Assistant Attorney General of the United States, she was only 32 years old, 5 years out of law school, and she had never prosecuted a single case in her career. Women had only had the right to vote in this country for 9 months. And suddenly she's the most powerful woman in the country, and she's in charge of prohibition cases all across the country, including cases against George Remus. And I think it's fair to say that her crooked bosses in the Warren Harding administration and at the Justice Department, they were all in bed with the bootleggers, taking graft money, taking bribes. Thought, let's put the little lady into office. She's going to be overwhelmed. She's not going to know quite what she's doing. And we'll be able to continue on our cozy relationship with all of the bootleggers. And of course, Mabel Walker Willenbrand took her oath of office in the fall of 1921 and just began kicking ass. And to add to all of this pressure on her, she was a victim of rampant sexism. You can imagine, anytime anyone wrote about her in the press, they had a comment on her appearance. And she was almost entirely deaf, which she spent an hour each morning concealing her hearing aids with her hair. And I just think it's remarkable that she was able to accomplish so much, including arguing cases before the Supreme Court of the United States while being almost entirely deaf. She just was a remarkable woman and way ahead of her time, and sort of a really fascinating character to write about.
I mean, a woman in her position in the 1920s is a little bit unheard of, isn't it?
Yeah. There was one thing. There was one predecessor, one female predecessor, and she stepped down. And I think that Republicans were eager to curry favor with the recently triumphant suffragists, and they decided to put another woman in there. Willenbrand was really young, really inexperienced, and I think they liked that about her.
Yeah. Okay, so we have Remus, we have Imogene, we have a prosecutor. Do we want to go anywhere deeper with this?
Well, we can, I could talk a little bit about the challenges that Willenbrand faced in enforcing prohibition. By the way, one of my favorite ironies of this book is that George Remus, bootlegger extraordinaire, who once owned 35% of all of the alcohol in the United States. Picture you own 35% of all of the alcohol in the United States. It's just staggering. He was a teetotaler who never drank a drop of booze. Meanwhile, Mabel Walker Willenbrand, the chief enforcer of prohibition, they called her Prohibition Portia. She, before prohibition, was somebody who liked to have a drink. She was a big fan of California wines. And after prohibition, I should mention, she actually became a lawyer again went into wine industry. She started representing wine growers, grape growers and wine distributors. So it's kind of ironic. But anyway, she had a very tough time enforcing prohibition. Here's a cartoon sort of joking about that. Give the little girl a hand. She has a mop pushing back a literal ocean of booze. And part of her problem was, United States itself. We have these two long, craggy borders. We have porous coastline. There were fleets of alcohol coming in from Mexico. There were more fleets coming in from Canada. It was all guided by searchlights, super, organized endeavors. There were liquor submarines in New York Harbor that would raise and lower out of sight, carrying booze. And on a personal level, there were a number of ways that individual people, if they wanted to bring their booze somewhere, they were going to find a place to bring their booze. And that was some of my favorite research. There was a story about a double amputee who could hide 36 pints in his prosthetics. Was one of my favorites. Here also, this was on your invitation, so you and I have talked about this one. It's really fantastic. At first glance, this woman is holding a book titled The Four Swallows by J.B. Corn, a not very subtle reference to John Barleycorn. But of course, if you flip open the top of the book, it's actually a flask, and there are 4 vials in there, hence the 4 swallows. This was a very popular contraption during Prohibition. It was the work of a Brooklyn-based inventor named John Nuttry. Before Prohibition, he made a name for himself designing little personal coin banks that look like books, but he patented this in February of 1921 and became quite a seller. Here's another one of my favorites. At first glance, she's sitting in the cafe, drinking her coffee, but what is she doing with her cane? She's dumping a bunch of alcohol in her coffee. This was a very popular contraption. There are dozens and dozens of reproduction ones on eBay now. I have one myself. It's kind of fantastic. You open it up in the middle and there's a big glass vial for you to pour your booze in. And as soon as we're allowed to go to bars again, I'm bringing my cane flask out. Here, this one I like to call why what a big flask you have. It's actually called the Bootlegger's Life Preserver, and it was very popular with women because Hard to think about it today, but prohibition agents were either too nervous or too polite to search women often. And in some states, it was actually illegal for people to search women at all. It was against the law. And women knew this and therefore found all manner of places where they could stuff their alcohol. They hid it inside their bloomers, they hid it inside their bras, and of course they hid it inside these enormous flasks beneath their fur coat, knowing full well that they were not going to be searched by male prohibition agents. And these are also a favorite of mine. These did not carry alcohol, but they were indispensable to bootleggers who brewed moonshine in forests or meadows. They were called cow shoes. And as you can see, the heels were carved of wood and made to resemble hooves. So they would literally cover your tracks if you were being pursued on foot by a prohibition agent. You know, he would be looking for your tracks and instead he would look down and just see a bunch of cow tracks. And these were really popular down south, especially. And they were they were modeled by a prohibition agent. I think this is from 1924. But Will Brandt's greatest challenge in enforcing prohibition was trying to find honest prohibition agents. The starting salary for a prohibition agent was $1,200 a year, which was barely a living wage in some parts of the country. You didn't have to have any qualifications to become a prohibition agent. In fact, there was one great story where a man was serving time in an upstate New York prison for armed robbery and murder when he got his prohibition badge. And she really thought that this guy was her best bet. This is prohibition agent Franklin Dodge. He was from a very illustrious Michigan family, well respected. He was a hard worker. And she put her trust in him. And he's the one that went to investigate George Remus's empire. And lo and behold, he also started investigating George Remus's wife. When I say investigate, it's a euphemism for he started having a torrid affair with George Remus's wife. So this was the love triangle. It was George Remus's wife, this prohibition agent who put Remus behind bars, and Remus himself. And as you might guess, things get pretty crazy. So, and now I will pause and let you. I will stop talking.
Like I said, there's so much meatiness to this book on so many levels, and to the story, with the different people involved and how they all interact. And it really is like a drama, a soap opera, if you will. And then you have all of these creative types with the way they're concealing and drinking alcohol.
Oh, yes. When there's a will, there's a way.
It's fascinating. It's also fascinating. Okay, so we've got this love triangle. We've got this powerful woman pushing people to do things. And of course, it all is going to come to a head.
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
Okay, we'll stop there. Okay.
Because we don't want to ruin it.
Yeah.
Right? But like this book, it definitely has the makings of a movie.
Well, from your mouth to Hollywood's ears, it has not been optioned yet. I've had a couple queries, but you know, you try not to, at least I do. I try not to think about the Hollywood stuff because it's something you have no control over. I had Sin in the Second City was optioned for 10 years by Ryan Murphy, the big TV guy who's behind Hollywood is his newest show. And I was sure he was it was always his next thing. It was always his next thing. And then he ended up leaving and going to Netflix, and he had to let it go. So it's like, you know, it's like a dagger in the heart. But so you just try to focus on the things you can control, you know, the research and the writing, and trying to figure out what the hell you're doing next.
But honestly, actually, all of your books have that.
Oh, well, thank you. You know, I like I said, I try to write history that could read like a novel. I'm interested in you know, these people did not live boring lives. In fact, the reason I like writing about them is because I was jealous of their lives. You know, writing about them is the next best thing. And so you know, there's ways to tell history and sort of why write about dead people if you can't bring them back to life? I mean, that's the bottom line for me.
Right. So to find out what happens, everyone, you're going to have to read Ghosts of Eden Park. If you have not read Sin in the Second City, I mean, America's most elite brothel, which is a phenomenal read. American Rose, 1920 story, Liar, Tempter, Soldier, Spy, about Civil War era female spies. I mean, this stuff is really good. So go check out Karen's books. If anyone has any questions about these specific books or about Ghosts of Eden Park or George Remus, throw them into the chat room. I want to spill the beans on another book you wrote.
Oh, yes.
That nobody knows about.
That's true.
Anybody out there, anybody a soccer player or like soccer or a fan of soccer? A few years ago, Alexandra wrote, I love soccer, all right. A few years ago, super phenom soccer star Abby Wambach
Yes.
came out with a biography called Forward. And Abbott here was actually the ghostwriter for that biography.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, my old editor, my editor for Sin in the Second City, here, maybe I should stop the share here unless, is that better? Can you all see me now?
Yeah, we can see the gazebo.
Oh, good. Okay. So my old editor, my editor for Sin in the Second City, wrote to me and said, would I be interested in ghostwriting? I'm a big lover of sports. I played sports. I never played soccer, but I was into the idea. And I thought Abby had an inspirational story. And so I said yes. And it was quite a roller coaster. I spent about maybe 6 to 9 months on it. And it was crazy from start to finish. Abby was going through a divorce at the time. She had just retired. Her divorce was kind of volatile, as I came to learn fairly quickly. And of course, in the middle of this, if anybody remembers Abby's story, she was arrested for a DUI. So the book started off as this inspirational memoir, 10 badass Abbott Wambi rules on and off the field, 10 rules for your best life. And was sort of applying her soccer mentality to real life lessons. And as I began doing this, and she's talking about how miserable she is and her divorce sucks and she's drinking all the time and came into our interviews hungover and then finally gets a DUI, I was like, Abby, here is a real chance to write your real story. You could be a huge inspiration if you just say, these are my struggles I'm having. These are the struggles that anybody is having when they're going through a divorce or a job change or a retirement or any huge life circumstance. And she did it, and she was very brave about it. And I was really relieved, actually. This is terrible, but I was sort of relieved that the book turned into that, because I was like, where was the drama in this book? I can't write 10 life lessons. There's no drama. And then suddenly, bam, drama. I'm really happy with the end product, and I think she was too.
Well, I mean, that's a great book.
Yeah.
So good job on that. And I
Thank you.
remember when you were doing that, you were just so knee deep in this project. You're like,
Yeah, it was intense because you have to do it very quickly.
I mean, I think there's also a lot of pressure, I would think, in writing somebody else's story.
Yeah. She would say things like, can you just write it like I talk? Because I was sort of writing it like a writer, and she was like, I don't speak like that.
Yeah.
So, which I got. I mean, she was right. It has to sound authentic and from her voice.
Yeah. So that's actually one of my favorite, I guess, little secrets about you. That you also wrote this bio for a rather famous athlete.
Yeah. It was fun. It was fun.
Good job on that.
Experience. Thanks.
Okay, I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you.
All right, let's do it.
Anybody in the chat, in the meeting here, in our virtual speakeasy, please ask some questions. I see Doug has a question. We'll get to you in a minute. I would like to know which of your books is your favorite.
Favorite is a hard word. It's like asking your favorite child. Really.
By the way, I'm convinced everyone has a favorite child. It's usually the youngest.
That's true. That's probably true. Okay, I think my best book is The Ghosts of Eden Park. It's my best book. I think it's my best written book. It is the juiciest source material. The story is one of the reasons I loved it is because the narrative arc is so perfect. You rarely have that narrative arc in real life, because real life is messy and doesn't always resolve. The narrative arc on it was just so perfect, and the details that I was able to glean were so various and ridiculous and weird, and I love that stuff. I was able to write a whodunit, and to keep people guessing, and I've always wanted to write a whodunit, and to be able to do it with nonfiction was really fun. So I have to say it's my best and my favorite.
Which actually is a good segue into Doug's question, because I'm always curious about process, right? I research a lot of history, and I'm often, looking at old papers, but you always want to translate it into a way that people can interpret it on just an accessible way, right?
Right.
Like you started this out, history is fun, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It just depends how you are able to digest it. So I'm always curious about process, and Doug has a question about difficulties you may have encountered in researching activities that are illegal. So what are those difficulties? And then the other question is, what was there besides court records and newspapers?
For the Garibay Park. I did not have, luckily, the difficulties mostly are when, researching women in particular, with the Everleigh sisters, quite understandably, they did not keep records of the Everleigh Club. Probably got rid of it when they knew that they were going to be challenged and possibly closed down. Luckily, with the Ghost of Eden Park, Mabel Walker Willenbrandt was a major public figure, and therefore knew she had to. She was going to be recorded for posterity, all of her papers and writings and such, and she has an extensive collection of the Library of Congress. Remus did not leave any paperwork, so that was sort of a challenge in terms of writing about illegal activity. What was it? There was a second part of that question.
What was there besides court records and newspapers?
So Mabel Walker Willenbrandt had a huge collection at the Library of Congress, letters to her parents that were amazingly poignant and personal, mostly about how the challenges that she felt with her job, especially being deaf, especially dealing with men. She wrote often about how sexist everybody was toward her. J. Edgar Hoover, who is a figure in this book, is actually quite fascinating. He's 29 years old in 1924 when he's appointed to be the head of the Bureau of Investigation, which was the precursor to the FBI. And he would not have been made the head of the Bureau of Investigation were it not for Willenbrandt, who put in a word for him and insisted he be hired. And I love that. And I love the fact that Willenbrandt was bossing around the baby Edgar. She bossed him around. But he had extensive files. He kept files on Franklin Dodge because he heard that Franklin Dodge, Prohibition agent Franklin Dodge, was having an affair with Remus's wife, was potentially conducting illegal activity with her. And Hoover sends an agent to spy on Franklin Dodge. So it's sort of a spy versus spy situation. And there were files that had to be declassified about that. And it was fascinating reading. One of my favorite tidbits of the whole book that Hoover's agent found was that Dodge was literally caught with his pants down in an Indianapolis hotel. You don't often find nonfiction research that where there's a scene where somebody gets caught with their pants down, but it happened in this book. So that was a lot of fun.
Lucas has a question. What do popular representations of speakeasies often get wrong?
Oh, interesting. That's a really good question. I mean,
my perspective on it is that people always, Hollywood and such, always like to romanticize everything. And
yes, they were not always a good-looking room. It's often somebody's basement. It was often just a drab, dour room where you were just going there to get alcohol. It wasn't like covered in lush velvet and leather plush seats. And I think my favorite detail about a speakeasy I found it was a family-run speakeasy in Cincinnati where like the 10-year-old child was in charge of running the hose down from the bathtub like a couple stories up. So it was definitely more of a homemade sort of low-key endeavor than what Hollywood portrays.
Yeah. Let me tell you, when my nephews got old enough to start fetching me beer from the fridge, That's when I knew life is good.
You got to teach them young.
I know, right? What are you working on now? Can you share anything?
Well, I'd like to be working on this book. I'm not sure it's going to happen yet, but it's a murder mystery set in the 1930s in the Galapagos Islands. So,
you like, it's interesting. You have like this specific time period in the 19th century and the specific frame of time in the 20th century that you like to dig into. Because now they're even Stevens, but if you do this, because you got 2 in each, and if you do this one, I guess you're mostly doing 20th century stuff. Is there something about either one of those eras?
No, I mean, I'll go where the story is, whatever. Yeah. I mean, I would write something about, I guess the 80s are history now. I just learned to my horror from my niece that the 80s are like old, like it's oldies. Like all the music I loved as a kid, they're oldies.
That's scary.
I'm like, oh my God, Run DMC is an oldie. I really just go where the story is. I'm actually also thinking about a novel, and that's set in the 1980s. So,
cool.
Yeah, I think I just wouldn't want to do something that took place like yesterday. Although if the story's there again, I would do it.
What are you reading now?
I am rereading the Elena Ferrante novels, the Neapolitan novels, My Brilliant Friend, that whole, those books. HBO just ran a brilliant adaptation of her second book, and I'm sort of obsessed. And I'm rereading it. The language is just so interesting. It's intimate and political at the same time. She manages to sort of encompass 10 human emotions in just a couple lines. She's just a fantastic writer, and it's inspiring to read her.
All right, everybody, I'm going to wrap this up. If you have any more questions, please ask now.
Yeah, or email me if anybody has book clubs or anything. Email me. I'm abbottauthor@gmail.com, ABBOTT, author, AUTHOR @gmail.com. Happy to do a Zoom chat with your book club.
You are so available to people in their book clubs. I'm always like really fascinated by
fun. You know why? Here's the one reason. Number one, it's really fun to, once your book is in the world, it's not yours anymore, and it's fun to talk to people who engage with the characters like you did. And the other thing is, when you're working on a book for 4 years, as I did with this book, you become friends with the characters. Now, I don't know if I would advise being friends with George or Imogene Remus, but you become friends with them. And when you talk about them to book clubs, it's a way of revisiting them. So it's just a lot of fun.
All right, I'm going to end this on something that I love.
Okay.
Whenever you and I get together to drink mostly copious amounts of red wine.
Yes.
I always ask you to do something for me.
I will do it.
Karen, Abbott, will you do the presidents for everyone?
Do you want the fast version, or do you want the clear version?
The clear version.
Okay, and see how long it takes you to
The clear version isn't that much slower than the fast version.
I'll do it how I usually do it. I can try to do it really. Okay. All right, ready? Washington, Adams, Jackson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Muir, Harrison, Tyler, Polk, Taylor, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant, Hayes, Crawford, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Phillips, Dark, Clinton, two Eyes, Kennedy, Johnson, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump.
Okay, so what you guys just heard was all of the American presidents in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And so I feel like you do it a lot clearer when we are drinking.
I'll do it one more time. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk, Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump. I always skip over the end because it started getting depressing. Except for Obama.
I think you just ended Obama.
Yeah, I could just end it Obama.
I don't know why I am always so excited to hear that from you, but something I always ask of you, especially when we're hanging out and talking.
No, it's fun to do. It's fun. It's like a good test of whether or not I'm like sober enough. Like, it's like, can I still do it? Should I have another drink? It's the.
How did you learn that, by the way?
I learned it when I was like 5. I don't know. I learned the Greek alphabet when I was 4. I went to Catholic school, which they don't teach you critical thinking. They teach you to memorize. So I just ended up memorizing like, I can do that and recite the Greek alphabet. I can't sew a button. I can't even type properly. So it's like, clearly my education was very useful.
We all have our skill sets.
Yes, I suppose so.
Abbott, thank you so much for hanging out.
Thank you for having me. You guys are so much fun. It's always so much fun to hang out with you, Liz. I can't wait till we can do it again in person. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. I know it's like Zoom, people are Zoom crazy lately.
We're
like
Zoom crazy.
My friend was like, I am Zoom fatigued. So anybody who comes and hangs out, thank you. Cause I know there's a lot going on online these days. So
yeah, we appreciate your support, everybody. We've been doing this twice a week since mid-March. Made a fast pivot and appreciate you guys being here. And it's really great to see so many people from so many like different parts of the country and the world. The beer community, the museum community, the arts community is tight. So thank you again, chicagobrewseum.org for everything that we are doing. Any updates and news you get there. Abbott, you're at KarenAbbott.net, is that right?
yes, that's the website. Yes. And abbottauthor@gmail.com.
Awesome. So yeah, I will talk to you soon. We've always been,
is this recorded? Is it?
Yeah.
Is this recorded?
Yeah. It's recorded. It'll go in somewhere magical soon that we'll announce.
Okay. Very cool.
We always talk about conspiring with our third musketeer, our third stooge.
I know, Leslie.
Leslie Zemeckis to do something. So we'll be hopefully doing something at some
I would
point.
love that. She's fun.
But always great to see you. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for chatting with us. Thanks for the presidents. And
thanks for having me and asking smart questions.
Thanks to everyone who joined. We will hopefully catch you again at the next event.
Thanks everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Thanks, Lucas.